Picture yourself walking through the golden corridors of Greenwich Palace in 1588. The walls gleam with tapestries worth more than entire villages, courtiers in silk and velvet bow as you pass. The air shimmers with candlelight reflecting off jeweled gowns. You're about to meet the most powerful woman in Europe, the legendary Virgin Queen herself. But as you draw closer to the throne room, something hits you that no portrait or history book ever prepared you for. The smell, not the sweet perfume of roses or lavender, something else entirely, something that makes your stomach turn and your eyes water. Because behind all that glittering magnificence, behind the carefully crafted image of divine perfection, lies a truth so shocking it would horrify even the dirtiest peasant in her kingdom. Queen Elizabeth I wasn't just ruling England, she was waging war against her own body, and the battlefield was filthier than you could ever imagine. We're about to journey together through one of the most disturbing royal stories ever told. And I find it incredible that people from around the world can witness these historical horrors together, separated by centuries, but united in our shock at what we're about to discover. You think you know Queen Elizabeth I. The portraits show a woman of porcelain beauty, draped in jewels, radiating power and grace. Her white face perfect as a marble statue, her red lips curved in a mysterious smile, her hands delicate as flower petals. But every single one of those images was a lie, a carefully constructed fantasy designed to hide a reality so grotesque that even her closest advisors could unstomach being in the same room. What I'm about to tell you will shatter everything you thought you knew about royal glamour. Because this isn't just a story about bad hygiene. This is a story about a woman so terrified of appearing human that she transformed herself into something that barely resembled one. A walking corpse painted with poison. A breathing statue that reeked of decay. The truth about Elizabeth's daily life was so disturbing that palace servants would literally hold their breath when attending to her. Foreign ambassadors would make excuses to cut their audiences short. Even her own courtiers, desperate to curry favor with the most powerful monarch in Europe, would find reasons to keep their distance. And the most shocking part, she did it all on purpose. Let's start with something that seems innocent enough. Sugar. Today, we think of it as a simple pleasure, maybe something we feel guilty about eating too much of. But in Elizabeth's time, sugar was pure luxury. It came from distant lands at enormous cost. Having sugar meant having power. Having lots of sugar meant having unlimited power. Elizabeth didn't just enjoy sugar, she devoured it, she drowned in it, she made it the center of her entire existence. But here's where this sweet obsession turns into something truly horrifying. Elizabeth's teeth. Oh, her teeth. By the time she reached her 40s, foreign visitors were writing home about the shocking state of the Queen's mouth. Black stumps where teeth should be. Gaping holes that whistled when she spoke. Breath so foul it could knock a grown man backward. But that was diplomatic language. The reality was far worse. Her teeth weren't just yellow. They were rotting black ruins that made her words nearly impossible to understand. And here's the part that will make your skin crawl. Elizabeth's solution to cleaning these decaying teeth: more sugar. She had her royal physicians create a special toothpaste made from sugar mixed with herbs. Yes, you heard that right. She was using the very substance that was destroying her mouth to try to clean it. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. But the story gets even more disturbing. When her teeth became too painful to ignore, Her doctors begged her to have them pulled. Elizabeth, terrified of pain and convinced that losing teeth would make her look weak, refused. To prove it wasn't dangerous, one of her courtiers actually volunteered to have his own tooth extracted in front of her. Imagine that scene. When they saw their queen's blackened teeth, they didn't recoil in horror. They saw fashion. They began deliberately blackening their own teeth with soot and charcoal to match Elizabeth's rotting smile. In a court where everything the queen did became the height of style, even tooth decay became desirable. Think about that for a moment. But Elizabeth's relationship with sugar was just the beginning of her war against basic human cleanliness. Because while her teeth were rotting in her mouth, she was making an even more shocking decision about the rest of her body. She was refusing to wash it. Now, you might think this was normal for the time. After all, people in the 1500s didn't have modern plumbing or understand germs the way we do today. But Elizabeth took the avoidance of bathing to levels that shocked even her contemporaries. There's a quote that may or may not be historically accurate, but it perfectly captures how people saw her hygiene. "I bathe once a month, whether I need it or not." Whether she actually said those words or not, the sentiment was absolutely true. Elizabeth viewed water as an enemy, not just inconvenient or unnecessary, but actively dangerous. She believed that water could weaken her body, make her vulnerable to disease, and, worst of all, wash away the carefully constructed image she had spent decades perfecting. Instead of bathing, Elizabeth had developed an elaborate system of fake cleanliness. She would change her linen undergarments multiple times a day. These shifts, as they were called, were supposed to absorb all the sweat and dirt from her body. The theory was that clean fabric touching dirty skin would somehow pull out all the filth. No soap, no scrubbing, no actual cleaning required. When she did freshen up, it wasn't with water. Palace servants would prepare special mixtures of rosewater, vinegar, and herbs. These would be gently dabbed onto her skin with soft cloths, never rubbed, never scrubbed, just lightly touched to her flesh like she was a precious artwork that might crumble at the slightest pressure. But here's the truly horrifying part. Elizabeth's avoidance of water wasn't just about medical beliefs or convenience. It was about maintaining an illusion, because underneath those layers of perfumed fabric and rosewater, years of toxic makeup had left it scarred, blistered, and peeling. Real bathing would wash away not just dirt, but the very foundation of her public image. The white lead paint that gave her that porcelain complexion. The mercury-based rouge that painted her lips. The layers upon layers of powder and pigment that transformed her aging face into the mask of eternal youth. As we peel back these layers of royal deception, as we begin to understand the horrifying lengths Elizabeth went to maintain her image, we're only scratching the surface of this story. Because what we've discovered so far about her rotting teeth and unwashed body is nothing compared to what she was doing to her face. The makeup she wore wasn't just cosmetic. Every morning, palace servants would help transform the aging queen into the porcelain goddess her subjects expected to see. But the substances they used were slowly killing her. The white lead eating away at her skin, the mercury poisoning her blood, the toxic chemicals seeping into her body with every application. And Elizabeth knew it. She had to know it. But she kept painting that deadly mask onto her face, day after day, year after year, because the alternative was unthinkable. The alternative was being seen as human. What drove a woman to such extremes? What kind of psychological torture was she inflicting on herself in the name of royal perfection? And how did the most powerful monarch in Europe become a prisoner of her own reflection? The answers to these questions will shock you even more than what we've already discovered, because we're about to learn that Elizabeth's hygiene wasn't just bad. It was a carefully orchestrated performance of self-destruction that would make even the most twisted horror story seem tame by comparison. The Virgin Queen wasn't just avoiding cleanliness, she was weaponizing filth, and the target of that weapon was herself. Picture the most disturbing makeup routine in human history. Every morning at dawn, Elizabeth's chambers would fill with the acrid smell of chemicals that belonged in an alchemist's laboratory, not on a woman's face. Her servants, hands trembling with fear and disgust, would approach their queen with brushes loaded with death itself. The foundation of Elizabeth's legendary porcelain complexion was Venetian ceruse, a mixture of white lead and vinegar that created that otherworldly pale perfection her portraits celebrated. But what those paintings couldn't show was the horror happening beneath the surface. Every application of this toxic paste was eating away at her skin like acid. The lead would seep through her pores, poisoning her blood, attacking her nervous system, slowly destroying her from the inside out. Day after day, month after month, year after year, Elizabeth would sit in her gilded chair while servants painted this poison onto her face. She could feel it burning. She could see the blisters forming underneath. She watched her real skin turn into a landscape of open sores and weeping wounds. But she never stopped, because stopping would mean showing the world that the Virgin Queen was just another mortal woman, aging and dying like everyone else. The lead wasn't enough. Elizabeth demanded perfection that went beyond human possibility. For her lips, she insisted on the brightest red available, a color that came from cinnabar, pure mercury sulfide. With every word she spoke, with every meal she ate, with every breath she took, she was ingesting one of the most toxic substances known to humanity. The mercury poisoning explains so much about Elizabeth's later behavior. The mood swings that could turn her from gracious queen to screaming tyrant in seconds. The memory lapses that left her staring blankly at courtiers whose names she'd forgotten. The trembling hands that made her signatures look like the scrawl of a madwoman. The paranoid delusions that convinced her enemies lurked behind every tapestry. But the most terrifying part wasn't what the makeup was doing to her mind. It was what it was doing to her face. Palace servants whispered about the queen's private chambers, where she would lock herself away for hours, clawing at her cheeks with her fingernails, trying to scrape away the burning poison. They spoke of finding bloody rags hidden in her rooms, evidence of her desperate attempts to clean wounds that would never heal. Elizabeth became so paranoid about her real appearance that she banned all mirrors from her private quarters. She couldn't bear to see what she had become. The woman who had once been celebrated across Europe for her beauty now looked like something from a nightmare. Her skin had turned into a patchwork of scars and open wounds. Her face had become so damaged that touching it would cause chunks of poisoned flesh to fall away. Yet every morning she would sit in that chair and let her servants paint the mask back on, thicker and thicker layers to hide the growing devastation. The makeup became less about beauty and more about basic concealment. She was wearing a costume made of poison, playing a character that was slowly killing the actress beneath. The psychological torture of this routine is almost impossible to imagine. Elizabeth knew she was destroying herself. She could feel her body failing, her mind clouding, her face disintegrating. But she also knew that her power depended entirely on maintaining the illusion of divine perfection. She had convinced her subjects that she was more than human, touched by God Himself, blessed with eternal youth and beauty. The truth would have shattered that illusion instantly, so she chose to shatter her body instead. As Elizabeth aged, the gap between her public image and private reality became a chasm that required increasingly desperate measures to bridge. She began refusing to appear in natural daylight, conducting all her public appearances by candlelight that would soften the harsh reality of her poisoned features. She had her portrait painter's work from decades-old sketches, ensuring that every official image showed her as she had been in her 20s, not as she was becoming in her 60s. The Queen's attendants developed an elaborate system of signals and protocols to protect her secret. They would position themselves strategically around her during public appearances, ready to step forward if her makeup began to crack or peel. They carried special powders and paints to touch up any damage that might occur during the day. They learned to read the warning signs when the toxic chemicals were affecting her more severely than usual, whisking her away from public view before anyone could see her weakness. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Elizabeth's hygiene wasn't what she was doing to her face. It was what she was doing to the rest of her body in the name of maintaining royal dignity. The Queen had developed an obsession with scent that went far beyond normal perfume use. She surrounded herself with so many artificial fragrances that courtiers complained of headaches and nausea after spending time in her presence. Rosewater, lavender, oil, musk, ambergris, and dozens of other scents were layered onto her clothing and skin in quantities that would have been overwhelming even by the standards of her heavily perfumed court. This wasn't about smelling pleasant. This was about creating a barrier between herself and the natural human odors that would have revealed her mortality. Elizabeth had convinced herself that queens didn't sweat, didn't emit bodily odors, didn't have the same physical needs as common people. The massive amounts of perfume were her way of maintaining this impossible standard. She carried pomanders everywhere, small, ornate containers filled with herbs and spices that she would lift to her nose whenever reality threatened to intrude. These weren't just for her own comfort. They were props in her performance of superhuman perfection. When a courtier's natural scent reached her nostrils, she would dramatically raise her pomander, sending a clear message that she existed on a different plane from such earthly concerns. The Queen's clothing had become part of her hygiene strategy as well. She wore layers upon layers of fabric, each one designed to create distance between her real body and the outside world. Her famous ruffs weren't just fashion statements. They were barriers that prevented anyone from getting close enough to detect any human scent or imperfection. Her gloves were permanently perfumed and never removed in public. Her handkerchiefs were soaked in oils and carried constantly, ready to be pressed to her nose at the first sign of anything that might remind her subjects that she was made of flesh and blood. Even her hair had become part of the elaborate deception. As the toxic makeup began causing her natural hair to fall out, Elizabeth switched to increasingly elaborate wigs. These weren't just styled hairpieces, they were architectural marvels, built up with wire frames and padding, then covered with hair that had been stiffened with sugar water and egg whites to hold impossible shapes. The wigs were so heavy and elaborate that they required special neck supports, turning the Queen's head into a barely mobile sculpture. The most horrifying detail about Elizabeth's later years was the complete isolation this routine created. She had built such an elaborate wall between herself and human contact that she had essentially ceased to exist as a person. She was a walking performance, a living statue, a breathing artwork that could never be touched or truly seen. Servants, who had served her for decades, were forbidden from looking directly at her face. New attendants would faint at their first sight of her without makeup. Even her closest advisors learned to conduct business while staring at the floor, unable to bear the sight of what their queen had become. The irony is devastating. Elizabeth had started this journey trying to appear more than human, to elevate herself above the common concerns of mortality and decay. But in the end, she had become less than human. She was a creature of her own making, trapped inside a costume of poison and perfume, unable to escape the prison she had built around herself. When Elizabeth finally died in 1603, her servants faced a terrible problem. The body they had to prepare for burial bore no resemblance to the queen the world remembered. Decades of toxic makeup had left her face so damaged that even in death she required one final application of the poisonous mask that had defined her reign. The Virgin Queen's legacy isn't just about political power or religious reform. It's about the horrifying lengths one woman went to maintain an impossible standard of perfection. She didn't just rule England. She waged war against her own humanity, and in the end, that war destroyed both the woman and the queen she had tried so desperately to protect. Elizabeth's story is a reminder that even the most powerful people in history were prisoners of their own making. She had everything a human being could want, but she threw it all away, chasing an image that was slowly killing her. The most terrifying part isn't what she did to herself. It's that she did it all voluntarily, day after day, year after year, choosing poison over truth, choosing performance over life. The golden corridors of Greenwich Palace still echo with the ghost of that sickly, sweet perfume, still carry the memory of footsteps that grew more unsteady with each passing year. And somewhere in those shadows, the spirit of Elizabeth I continues her eternal performance, forever trapped behind a mask of her own creation, forever hiding from the one thing she feared most, being human.